So my presentation today, Tomb Raiders. It's kind of looking at malicious actors and how they can pilfer critical data from the graves of our decommissioned IoT technologies. So as we get into start talking about the deacquisition of IoT, probably the most pertinent statement in this whole thing is written on this page. It all must be disposed of sooner or later. Over the years, we've gotten comfortable with disposing of, for the most part, traditional network technology like laptops, desktops. Remember, many years ago, people were disposing of stuff and there was reports coming out about hard drives containing things and stuff like that. And we learned our lessons from that a number of years ago. Now we come up with IoT, a new problem, and we're back in that same boat again. So let's start digging into this a little bit. So the deacquisition of IoT, what am I talking about? Again, as I mentioned, it's going beyond, the typical laptops, desktops, server technology. Those we've gotten comfortable with pulling drives out, shredding them, destroying them, or doing various things. Now we have to deal with these IoT technologies. And I know we don't always think about what these devices do or contain, but let's just think about a few of the items here on this page. The bigger one, multifunction printers. These can contain everything from embedded chips containing data to actual hard drives for the most part. We're starting to see an improvement on getting rid of the hard drives in these devices and securing those. But I have a little thing I'll talk about here when we move on to a couple other slides. But if we get into looking at these other devices, we have pictured here infusion pumps, we have consumer grade stuff, we have light bulbs, we have TVs. All of these technologies are either being integrated into our homes, our home Wi-Fi's, our businesses, our organizations, our government networks. These things contain everything from PII information to HIPAA data, to credentials to gain access to our networks, all the way to some cases containing Active Directory credentials. And what do we do with these a number of times when they come to their end of life? We may just throw them in the trash. We may sell them. We may do a number of different things with them. But these are critical devices that we need to consider the implications of these technologies when we go to decommission them and what they potentially contain. Unfortunately, in my opinion, a number of these devices don't have simple ways of flushing the data out of them. Vendors are getting better at it. I'm seeing vendors putting factory resets into these devices, and it's something we must trust in a number of cases. But I've also done assessments and testing on technology where actual factory resets did not purge the data out of the devices completely. So moving on to the whole deacquisition of IoT, what are the typical processes? This is not a complete list. There may be other things, but they're the ones I typically see the most of and the ones I've encountered over the years of working at a number of different organizations. So we get into the resell as an example. A company comes to the end of life with their technology and they decide they want to go ahead and resell it to recoup some of the associated expenses with the technology. Good example. Disposal services. Hey, we have all this technology, we want to get rid of it, we put it on pallets and we just give it away or pay somebody to take it away. We expect them to do who knows what. Often that's driven contractually. Do we want them to feed it into a giant metal shredder, or do they turn around and just resell the technology to make even more money off of it? Again, we need to think about what our disposal services are doing with the technology. The other thing is donations. We may donate these things to nonprofits. And kind of the big one is kind of the leased equipment model. And you often see that with multifunction printers. And it brings up an interesting story. The picture on the right doesn't do justice with all of the printers. I was in a warehouse a number of years ago, actually purchasing a multifunction printer for security testing purposes. And during the conversation, I told the guy, hey, I'm working on some vulnerabilities where you can extract critical data from these devices. One of the things was this attack that all pen testers use is called a passback attack, where you connect into the multifunction printer and you go, hey, LDAP service on this thing. I want you to connect back to me and do an LDAP lookup. And the printer will actually connect back to you and give you Active Directory credentials that are in the devices. And the gentleman thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And I got into the conversation. He said, all these devices we get in are required to be purged. Well, I ended up purchasing one of the devices, and while I was there, I hooked my equipment into it to see if it functioned right and the attacks worked properly. And it turned out I was actually able to, in front of him, pull Active Directory creds for a business off one of these devices. And he was quite upset because he was told all of these were supposed to be purged before they came to him. Well, we spot checked 3 or 4 or 5 devices over a half an hour time frame and found out probably 2/3 of them had not been purged or reset. Also, during that conversation, I asked him where all these printers were going. And the warehouse, literally, as far as you could see, was printers. You could almost see the curvature of the earth. This warehouse was so big. And he said, I'm shipping every one of them to Asia. So, I mean, this makes us start thinking, does Asia need all of our old wore out printers, or is somebody in Asia using these things to harvest data out of because we're sending them all of our critical information, passwords, Active Directory creds, Wi-Fi creds, and stuff like that. So it's something to think about as we get into deacquisition of IoT technology. So the next one I want to dig into is, so how difficult is it to get critical data out of these type of devices? How do we pilfer the data? It's horribly simple for the most part. So this was a great article that was published in tech early or mid last year, and it's associated with Bodycams. So there was a city government that decided to update their body cams for their police department. So they turned around and took all of them and tried to recoup some of the money, we're assuming. They turned around and sold them on eBay. And some researcher found these on eBay and purchased them. It turned out that they contained literally hundreds of hours of unencrypted footage of officers searching homes, arresting people, and various things police officers need to do as part of their job. Again, a leak of what I would consider private or critical data that I'm sure that the government, that local government or police department that disposed of these was not happy with. So something to think about. There's another good article here. This one was just published a few months back in Ars Technica. This was Western University students doing a research project dealing with Amazon Echo devices. So they went out and they purchased about 85 devices off eBay and I think some other services or places where they got them. They found out that nearly 60% of the devices, I believe, still were configured with user credentials. So that is Wi-Fi creds, Amazon account password information. But on top of that, these devices contain a chip, an embedded multimedia controller chip. And these chips have a process known as level wearing. So if you rewrite or change data on the chip, level wearing will actually remove the data, write it somewhere else, go through garbage collecting and override the old spot. The purpose of that is to make sure the chip lasts for a long time, because if you read and write the same location on a chip, it'll burn it out and cause premature failure of the chip. But during their research on Amazon Echo 3s, they found out that if you do a factory reset and then turn the device off fairly quickly after that, the garbage collecting never takes place. And through forensic analysis of the embedded multimedia controller chip, it was easy to recover the data also. So another interesting thing, I did some research similar to this on Echoes, but the Echo 2s last year, and I was not able to discover this, but I have about a dozen Echo 3s sitting here underneath my desk. And the goal is to reproduce some of the research to really understand how level wearing was failing or garbage collecting was failing, leading to these devices exposing a forensically recoverable data. So interesting concept. When we're doing factory resets to purge devices, we need to think how long these devices need to be remaining online to ensure that the proper electronic mechanisms will remove the data. So here is some devices that I purchased, Luma devices. And I purchased these off eBay. I bought 16 of these. These were devices, they're Wi-Fi mesh devices, and I purchased them for the purpose of using them at DEF CON IoT Village this year for hands-on exercises and training for people. I found over 40% of these devices still contained the user's credentials on these, the Wi-Fi passwords, the SSIDs, everything was still configured on these things. The interesting thing was 2 sets of these they come in boxes of 3. 2 of the sets that I examined actually contain information from small businesses. So these were typical consumer grade stuff, but a small businesses was using them within their environment. So when we start thinking about this type of thing, and we're going to talk about it again here in a few minutes, when we're actually replacing technology with new technology, if we turn around and dispose of the technology and set up the new technology to mimic the old technology, the same Wi-Fi credentials, the same passwords, what's the impact if somebody gets these devices? They have the ability to pull data out of these devices easily and are able to use that data to potentially attack my small business if they want to, because often there's enough data in here to determine where this came from. Wi-Fi SSIDs that are published, if they're very unique, can often be refound, published on Wiggle online, where you can go where people publish up war driving data that they actually discover and find, making it easy to look this data up and find where these devices potentially came from and where those same creds may be being used somewhere else. So one of the easiest ways of, I am purely after your data on a device. I get a device, I want the data off of it. I can go through and go JTAG and try to connect up different ways. It's easy for me to pry the device open, toss this device in a hot air reflow oven, pull the chip off of it and read the chip. I've done this literally hundreds of times. It takes me a few minutes to do it, and I'm able to get the data out of it. If I want to recover the device, I turn around and just reflow the chip back onto the device. They're easy steps, easy processes. It's not complex. Anyone can learn how to do it. The equipment you see sitting there for reading chips, that device costs, I think, $100, $120. The socket that goes in them come in various sizes, and they range anywhere from a few dollars to $40 or $50 for these cheap devices. This device is capable of reading 10,000 plus memory chip types out there. Easy for somebody who wants to harvest data to gain access to stuff either through resellers, eBay, out of the trash, and recover the data. And another great example of that same thing we're going to show here is the infamous smart light bulb. To start this off, I'm going to talk about a story. When I was at DEF CON this year, running the hands-on exercise at the IoT Village, that got attention from a number of people. One evening, a gentleman approached me on smart light bulbs. He was involved in a small business that had a number of small little satellite offices. It wasn't a large organization, but they had 30 or 40 small offices. And the 30 or 40 small offices actually use these type of smart light bulbs. They implemented these light bulbs throughout the organization. He was like, how do I manage these things? How do we deal with, when they burn out? I have to find out they burn out, I have to go. And the first thing I asked him was, when the light bulb burns out, what do you do with it? Oh, we just throw it in the trash. Well, of course you do. You do that with every light bulb when it burns out. These are not normal light bulbs. If you pop this device open, it is not your grandparents' light bulb. This is actually an embedded device containing microcontrollers and data. The square unit on the top is where all the brains are. That is a module that's produced for doing Wi-Fi communication, so it can connect into the Wi-Fi. The rest of the circuit is mainly for handling power and controlling the LEDs. So data control comes in through the Wi-Fi and through the Wi-Fi module, goes to the rest of the circuit, turns the LEDs on and off. When these devices die, burn out, it is never burning out because the Wi-Fi chip fails. It's because the LEDs fail. So this thing's fully capable of connecting and communicating over a Wi-Fi network. So we pull the module off, we wire it to a breakout board real quick. The red is power, the black is ground, the green and the yellow are what we know as UART, Universal Asynchronous Receive Transmit, or serial communication. And the purple line hooks to what's known as a GPIO 0. So when we take GPIO 0 to ground, when this device comes up, it goes into a debug mode, and we use simple software for actually pulling the firmware off the device. Here we pulled the firmware off and we brought it up into a simple hex editor, and we're able to quickly find the SSID and the pre-shared key. They stored the pre-shared key in a fixed hex. We just convert it to ASCII and we get this extremely complex pre-shared key password, and we're able to pull it clearly out of a light bulb. Are all light bulbs this bad? No. Is this light bulb still this bad? No, the vendor actually fixed this. But this data is still on the light bulb. If somebody wants it out of there, it's only a process of a little extra reverse engineering and time. And if there's critical data and they want it, they'll be able to get it, because it has to be able to store this data somewhere on that device. So what next? How do we understand and mitigate this issue? Well, the first part of it, in my opinion, is awareness. And that's kind of what this talk's about. It's kind of laying the groundwork for us to start thinking about this as a real potential issue, awareness. And then we want to develop a plan and execute upon that plan. So if we start thinking about the planning and execution, this is kind of where I see it. You need to have some kind of governance. Organization has to have policies that drive how do we acquire IoT technologies for business enablement, cost savings, and various other reasons. How do we actually decommission the data, these devices, and make them go away? We need to define policies and processes within an organization around that. And critical to this is also ownership. The scary thing is most IoT technology sneaks into organizations as shadow devices. It usually has no ownership, no patching, no management. In a case like that, when it's time to decommission it, it's just going to go into the trash and out the door with all of your creds, passwords, HIPAA data, PII information, or whatever else these particular devices can hold. So what is the process to get rid of the data? There's no perfect answer to this, to be honest. We still need to come up with effective plans and processes, in my opinion. You can wipe or clean a factory reset. That's often what I particularly do as a consumer. I make sure a factory reset's done. I leave the device powered up long enough. I know that it's gone through its cleanup processes, and I can pull the device out and then potentially repurpose it for the most part. Is that 100% guarantee? No, I have had a number of devices where I've done factory resets, pulled the chip afterwards, and was able to still pull data out of the actual chip, flash chip that stores the data. Destruction. That's one thing. As an industry or business, government entity, you can hire services that can feed a lot of this technology probably into giant metal shredders and destroy it. As consumers, this is not practical. In the cases at my home, I've actually done this. I've actually destroyed various chips to get rid of them for the most part. But it's not practical for most consumers. The other thing is a change in accounts and passwords. So what do I mean with this? Often when you, as a large business organization entity, you decide to implement a new solution within your organization, you can often bring up in parallel the old with the new. And in cases like that, let's say you happen to be an office management system or a a conferencing system that you're putting in your conference room. It's easy enough to implement those conferencing systems that may integrate into a Wi-Fi network or something, and integrate them into a new radio system also at the same time with different SSIDs and different passwords. And then once the new system's incremented, then you can actually decommission the old stuff. At that point, the old passwords, the old SSIDs, and everything these systems used to connect to are no longer there. So then you can wipe or clean and send them out the door. If somebody gets them and extracts the data, that data should not be usable. That's where I talk about the changing the accounts and passwords. More complex, not necessarily something you can get consumers to do. So again, I don't know if this answers all the questions, but I'm hoping it'll at least make you start asking questions about this issue, about decommissioning of IoT technology and the potential risk it could cause for an organization or business. Here's my contact information. If anyone has any questions or interest in discussing this further, please feel free to reach out to me. We currently have some research underway in this particular industry area dealing with decommissioning of technology, and we're hoping that a detailed paper of that will come out in first quarter of next year discussing it. And the goal with that is to make this information aware, and also have solutions and ideas, at least specifically for that industry.